This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. This interview was originally conducted on March the 3rd, 1965. The interview is conducted by Mr. Frank Doyle. The interviewee is Mr. Leslie A. McRill, McRill of Oklahoma City. This interview is being re-recorded on April the 10th, 1985 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
And this recording for the Oklahoma Christian College Library, Living Legend Library, is being made at 1817, isn't it? Northwest 14th Street. And it's the home of Mr. Is it Leslie? Leslie McRill. How do you spell that?
L-E-S-L-I-D-M.
McRill, M-C-R-I-L-L. Mr. McRill, we know that the college appreciates this tremendously, taking your time and sort of reach back in the back of your mind and some of the memories and go down the list of the activities in which you've been engaged, and it's all part of the history of Oklahoma City, and we'll go down as a basis for historians and school workshops and students and so forth. When did you, from where did you come, in other words?
Well, we came from eastern Kansas, Franklin County. Williamsburg is the name of the town.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we three youngsters all graduated.
And you?
I came in 1904 to western Oklahoma, to Old Day County, Old Grand. My brother and I ran a newspaper out there.
Oh, you came by yourself? So.
Came to my brother. He was already out there with the newspaper. Yes, I came by myself.
Uh-huh.
Folks didn't come to...
Out where?
Old Grand.
Old Grand. Uh-huh.
Old Ellis County.
Yes.
Town's not there anymore. Nothing left at all, they tell me. But they have their reunion there every year, just as regular as can be.
For heaven's sake.
Come back there, there's good picnic grounds. It's right on the bank of the South Canadian River. I came there in 1904, and then in 1906,
yes, sir.
we all moved to Watonga. My brother had had a newspaper there before, too.
Right.
And then I was in ex-Governor Tom Ferguson's print shop for several years.
At Watonga.
At Watonga.
Mm-hmm. They put out a paper there, too?
Well, Ferguson put out the Republican, or Watonga Republican, and I worked in his office.
Is that paper still existing?
Yes, it's still there. I think the editor just died last week or week before.
Mm-hmm.
It had changed editors, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I've forgotten now what his name was. Cowboy something. Cowboy Curtin.
Curtin, that's right. Mm-hmm.
He just passed away with the children.
Did you know him?
No, I never did go back to Watonga to be there very much. Maybe just a funeral or something like that.
Mm-hmm. When did you, now you were in Watonga in what years? You recall?
I came there in 1906, and then in the fall of 1907, I came down to enter Epworth University.
Where was
it? Oklahoma City.
Oh, at Oklahoma City. Mm-hmm.
And we, my brother and sister and I, all graduated from Epworth University here in the city.
And that later became OCU, right?
Yes, that was Oklahoma City College, and then Oklahoma City University.
Mm-hmm.
It was Oklahoma Memphis University at Custer. I taught there. I taught for the school, I think 10 years altogether in Custer and here.
After your graduation?
After my graduation. I taught modern languages, French, Spanish, and German. I have a master's degree in French from the University of Southern California.
Oh, when did you go to school out there?
I think it was 1923, I believe was the year that I had leave to go out there.
I see. It was quite a transition in that school, wasn't it?
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
It was a wonderful school. I took my work and got my thesis ready, and then I got word that I could teach here in the summer if I could get back in time, but their commencement was after the school commenced here.
Uh-huh.
So the professor, I told him one time when I was talking with him that I could teach back here, but I wouldn't have kept here in time. And he said, well, you've done all your work, just get ready and go home. So he didn't give me any final examinations or anything. He had my thesis already, so he
From Southern Cal.
sent me on home.
Uh-huh.
So I came to the summer session.
Uh-huh. Who was here at the time? Who was the head of the school at the time? Do you recall?
Let's see, Dr. Hislop came down from Guthrie and was over E.G. Green. Dr. E.G. Green had charge of the school temporarily. I was up on City College, and I think when they first moved in over here, and then I don't recall now.
Recall some of your students that you had?
Oh yes, I had quite a number of students. I had a number in Guthrie especially, and down here too. I had a number of young Methodist preachers, supposed to be young. Some of them were older than I was, but they had been delayed in their education. I had Dr. C.D. Meade, who became one of the leading Methodist ministers of the state, and I had, we called him Williamson, Dr. A.G. Williamson, who was later president out here at OCU.
Uh-huh.
I had him and his wife, Dempsey. She was Dempsey Stewart. She's still living here in the city.
Mm-hmm.
I had them in I remember in my history classes. And then I had Dr. Earl Story and Fred Dunning. Nearly all of these have passed away, I think, now.
Mm-hmm.
J. Kelsey McRill, I believe, was in my classes. I'm not sure, but I think he was.
Well, you spent most of your time then, practically all of it in education then, haven't you?
Yes, education of one kind or another.
Uh-huh.
The church the little church up at Ripley, I had it 12 years, the Methodist church. I filled out for one of my students who had...
Well, did you go back and forth?
I go back and forth, commute from Guthrie and from the city here also.
Uh-huh.
And go back and forth every Sunday, 65 miles up there and back. And I remember when I had broken my ankle, I went up. At that time, I didn't have a car, and I went on the bus.
Yes, sir.
And very awkward getting on a bus because the cast was from my ankles clear up to my hip.
Oh.
But I made it up there, and then those bridges washed out up there, and the buses had to go to Stillwater and change at Stillwater and then come down. And I believe changed down at Perkins Corner twice with that cast.
Uh-huh.
To get there to my church. And I remember one Sunday morning it was just pouring down rain, and the people were going to meet me outside of town. The bus went right by their place, but it was raining, so they didn't come out, and so I just went on to Cushing and thought, well, I'll come back in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
When morning came, it was raining just as hard as it had been the night before, so I just stayed on the bus and came on back to Oklahoma City. I told them I had a lovely ride up there and back in the rain.
Was your sister, did your sister teach there at the same time?
No, she taught in El Reno.
In
South Dakota and El Reno.
Uh-huh.
But she quit teaching right after the First World War to come into my brother's law office as his law secretary.
Uh-huh.
And she was living in his law office clear up till the time he died, just about 6 or 7 years ago.
He had an office here?
Oh yes, he was city attorney for a while and city manager for a while.
What was his name?
Albert L. McRill.
Albert, yes.
His book is right there on the stand underneath that yellow Serpentine also. It's a history of Oklahoma City from the day of the run there up to just a few years ago. It has pictures of all of the notables.
That's right. We heard about... we knew about this, but we wanted to make sure that we got it down in your voice.
And we have in all of it. The only one we've been able to hold on to, and we hang on to that.
I can imagine.
We don't let it get away from us.
Aren't there any others in existence?
Well, people have them all over. He sold them all out, but there are no more reprints.
No more reprints.
Yeah, I think they're in the libraries here. There's one in each of the libraries.
Mm-hmm.
But They're a collector's item now.
Oh, this is, this was...
It shot the very day that the train came in here, hauling the people and the organization of political parties right away to and the jumping of town lots and controversies and all the things. And then especially he's followed, as you notice, the title Satan came also. He's followed the seamy side of life rather than strictly the constructive. Of course, he has the constructive in contrast as he goes along, the ones who were working for the upbuilding of the community as well as those who were trying to tear it down.
And he published this in 55.
Yes.
I've heard about this. I haven't had a chance to read it, but I'll sure get one in the library.
All the details
Uh-huh.
of the underworld. They're up for.
Well, it's an, although it may not be as pretty as some sides of the history, it's still a part of the history.
It's a part of the development, the struggles to make Oklahoma City what it is, in spite of the evil forces that were rampant in those days.
Well, you've
Our poetry book is Tales of the Night Wind, that yellow book there.
you put out quite a few yourself.
The yellow one, it's all Indian poetry, Indian traditions and that sort. And that's my Oklahoma poetry magazine. I edited that for the last 4 years. That's full of poetry of all the poets of Oklahoma and some from Arkansas and Texas, different places. But that particular book, Tales of the Night Wind, is strictly Indian tradition and lore. There's poems concerning Oklahoma characters. Satan, you know, they just brought his body back a few weeks ago from buried Fort C on the side of Satan's body back and buried it beside a Satan. I have poems about them in there. And Sacagawea, who carried the Lewis and Clark expedition across the country. And ICO, the only Indian, I think, who was ever made a sergeant for life. He was down at Fort Sill, served the Army forces, and he was also quite a force for preserving peace during the ghost dance uprising throughout the country. And then I have the poems on the Little Big Horn, on our Cheyennes here in part in the Battle of the Little Big Horn, and then the Washita Massacre with General Custer, and full poems dealing with all sorts of Indian customs.
How did you find time to do all that?
Well, during the Depression, my sister, for a while, dropped out from my brother's office and worked for the United States government, and my mother wasn't well, and I quit teaching to take care of her, and so I just went down to my brother's law office and by longhand did a lot of his dictation and typed it, and had a lot of time sitting behind the desk there, and I just happened to get interested in the Indian business and wrote a poem or two, and T.V. Williams, who was quite a character here in the state during the past as a politician, he edited the Cactus Hornet and stirred up trouble for malefactors wherever he could. And his great-grandfather was a Cherokee Indian blood. But he was a strict Virginia gentleman with a little goatee and a cane and a big stomach, you know, and very pompous and especially well educated and sharp as a tack. And ironically bitter against enemies. He came in and read one of my poems and recommended, said, I don't know poetry, but that suits me. And so he really started me to writing, and he brought me a lot of incidents and things of that sort. I have one book there on Geronimo. The little leather book is the story of Geronimo's life. That would make, I think, a splendid recording in itself.
Yes, sir.
About 22 pages, something like that. If you happen to want anything like that, Geronimo was an Oklahoma character, and that gives the history of his life, and with it, of course, the history of the Apaches and their customs and things of that sort.
It should be.
So
It should be
that
recorded.
would make a splendid recording, I imagine, and it would be something that would be worthwhile, probably forever.
Oh, we should preserve as much as we can of our history.
Yes, but that is on strictly Geronimo. Of course, he wasn't a lovely character, but at the same time, he was a patriot from their standpoint. And George Washington, of course, was not a patriot from the standpoint of the English, but he was from our standpoint. Depends on who's looking.
Yes. How true, sir. How true.
But I do think that is a splendid portrayal of Geronimo's life and purposes.
All of these are
Clear over for about 22 pages on his life, the customs of the Apaches, the love scene, the giving of ponies for the bride, and the vision, going to the mountain and fasting as a boy for a vision, and then his raids against the Mexicans, and
into the mountains retreat. Swift sped his moccasined feet. 4 days of fasting and prayer, calling on gods of the air. Vision and song he implores, then his equipment for wars.
Well, the Indian went out showing fast as he does at puberty age, and the first thing he sees after his fast is probably be his totem for life. If he sees a bear, well, the bear's attributes are his, and they're to be to look after him, or the eagle, or first thing he sees when they held him up at his christening, when they held him up, the priest held him up, he yawned, and so they named him Gokaya. That was his name, Youth of Yawn.
Youth of
He
Yawn.
never was Geronimo until the Battle of Quiscaya with the Mexicans, when he darted in and out behind the rock like a serpent, and threw the arrow, and then he'd disappear and strike his foe, and they yelled out, Geronimo, Geronimo. I think they were calling on St. Jerome, but the Indians thought they were calling him Geronimo, so from then on his name was Geronimo, because they took their names from different feats that they performed, and so he took his name from that.
Well, it's amazing, isn't it? Particularly that the revelation of how he got his name, because there have been so many versions of that.
Yes, that's right. That was at the Battle of Quiscaya against the Mexicans, and when he put them to rout.
Well, you certainly got into it rather deeply and apparently enjoyed every bit of it.
All the books on Indians in the Carnegie Library at that time. And of course, many others too that I been following.
Did your brother write any other book other than this?
Well, just the little green book there underneath his he was 25 years teacher of Sunday school down there at First Church.
My Silver Jubilee.
He calls that his Silver Jubilee anniversary. And that's some of the material he had used in his Sunday school class during the years. That and Satan Came Also are his books. Now that one there, I've just written recently, that has to do with the Hopi Indians. That design is an interesting thing. It was in the Oklahoma orbit some time back. That's a shell that's over here in the historical building. It was dug up at Spiro. And it's just sat there in the book, in the case, and nobody knew anything about it at all. But Mr. Wright gave me a book of man's life's work translating these designs and emblems on the old Incas and clear back and all over the world. He spent his whole life at it, interpreting the meaning of these things. And so this spider that was dug up over here at Spiro has been there in the shelf all these years, nobody knowing anything about it except it was a nice shell with a spider engraved on it. But in that spider,
what's the material? What's it made on? Is it
it's a shell.
a shell.
It's a shell, and it's painted on there. That's the design painted on there. And the two circles represent the universe. And this swastika in here, which is an old emblem, you know, represents the four powers at the time of creation that were to bring the earth to order and to rule it and govern it
Uh-huh.
with the will of the Almighty. And then the spider, of course, is the representative of a workman,
Uh-huh.
busy working. And then here is the sun, and they worship the sun, as the rays of the sun. And these hands around here undoubtedly represent the 7 commands. Let us make this, let us make that. That's represented in the Old Testament. There's 7 of them.
Yes, sir.
And these sharp fingernails sticking up there are indicative, according to their signs, of activity, of work. And they're very prominent, you notice, on there. And then the design here on the hand is a design of the master mechanic. All of those things are on that shell, and there it's sat. Nobody knows anything about it at all.
How big is this shell?
It's it's about 8, maybe 8 inches across, or 10, something like that. That's almost the size of it right there, almost life size. See, it's not quite even.
And this is the destruction of...
Awatobi. Well, now that has nothing to do with the shell. I used that for design. This destruction of Awatobi, there were several towns out there among the pueblos, and when the missionaries or the Spanish first came, they didn't want them to come in. It was against their rule for any foreigner to cross the threshold of their towns. And they sprinkled sacred meal there as a sign to stay away. But when Coronado first came, he sent a messenger ahead that he was coming. And this messenger happened to be a colored man from Portugal, a Portuguese, who is credited with being the discoverer of New Mexico. And he came and told him that Coronado was coming. But for some reason or other, they killed him. And, of course, I've used my imagination and told why in here. But one of the towns, Awatobi, let the foreigners come in. And so while their elders were down in the kiva with their sacred rites, where they kept their sacred meal and their rattlesnakes that they use in the parade, out there every year. While they were down in there, the messengers from these other towns slipped in and withdrew the ladders from the kiva and threw in there burning sagebrush and red peppers, and utterly destroyed the leaders of the town of Awatobi. And then they took the women captive and carried them away. And the town is out there in ruins yet, and it's called sometimes the singing house, Tallyhogan. And the Indians are afraid to go near it yet.
Now that is where?
That's in
New Mexico?
In New Mexico. And that's what that is. And it's written as a tragedy. The story I tell first in just running verse. And then the tragedy part I have written after the manner of the Greek tragedy, with the choruses.
Oh, yes.
And then the activity as it takes place, the burning of the tribe and the carrying them away, and the vindication of the old ceremonies and over the
is this book in the library now?
I think there's one of them down there. I have plenty to read it here at home. I think it's down there. I know it's in the historical library. I always have everything out there right away. And I think it's down in the city library too, but I wouldn't be positive. I intend to put one down there sometime, but I haven't as yet.
And well, you've contributed to many articles, the Oklahoma...
7 of the Chronicles.
The Chronicles.
I'll give you the list of them. It's in here in the back of this little book. Here are the historical writings of 100 years of Oklahoma verse. I went back and researched all the Indian papers on the east side from the very beginning, since they brought the tribes up here.
Yes.
And those people were much given to verse. Nearly every week the newspaper would have some poetry in it. And I got that all out of there. By the way, I have all the poems that I could get hold of from back there up to the present, thinking that sometime we might run an anthology if we get anyone interested enough in it. covering all of the poetry movement of Oklahoma from the very beginning. Then the story of an Oklahoma cowboy, that was Billy McGinty, a resident of Ripley, just passed away a few years ago at the age of 90. He was a cowboy from the age of 14. And he was with Roosevelt at San Juan Hill, and Roosevelt kept him as his orderly to take care of his horse. And he visited at the mansion, and after Roosevelt was president, was a very great favorite of both the president and his wife. And then he was made life president of the Rough Riders Association.
Oh, yes.
And they met in Arizona every year, and he was vice president.
He lived in Ripley.
He lived in Ripley. An early day crusader for law and order, and that's the story of T.B. Ferguson over at Watauga fighting against the saloons and eradicating the bootleggers. And that's from the files of the Watauga Republican. And then the story of a town that will not die. That's the story of Ingalls, the outlaw town out near Stillwater, you know, where and in that story, I went and researched all of the magazines and newspapers on the outlaw fight with the marshals, and I knew 3 or 4 people who were there the day of the fight, and talked with them. And I roomed with a fellow there who was 12 years old at the time, and they tell, you know, now some fellow over Tulsa tells about there being so many hundred shots in that old saloon building. These boys were about 12 or 13. They were out raiding a watermelon patch, and they heard the shots. And they rushed into town, and this fellow said to me there were just 14 shots exactly in the old building. We kids counted them.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
But there's the story of the outlaws. I have that reviewed pretty thoroughly. And then music in Oklahoma by the Billy McGinty Band. On account of his cowboy reputation, he had a cowboy band named after him. He wasn't a musician himself at all, but sometimes he'd sit holding an instrument, and he held it so awkwardly you could tell he never was a musician, but they took his name because of his reputation. And they broadcast over at one of the eastern Oklahoma towns, the very first radio broadcasts that were made. This band broadcasted.
From Tulsa, was it, or from?
From Ripley. And then I have this is just a book review of the DeSoto exploration and expedition. And then my last one, which I consider the most important, was Ferdinand, the first white settlement in Oklahoma. That is out there east of Newkirk on the river. The site is very easily found. A friend of mine went out with me, and we could see there in the grass the depression, several feet wide, clear around horseshoe-shaped where the stockade had been. Where there were early traders. And then there are the mounds around where probably mounds resulting from the Wichita villages that were set up in towns, houses in the village, and they have, of course, decayed and fallen down and left a mound, and some of them have been excavated, and they find different things in that early civilization at the time that the French and before the French came, and that was in 1719 when Claude Duchesne came there and had a conversation with them and made a treaty with them. At the same time, La Harpe was down here around here on Arkansas somewhere here, Muskogee, meeting with the many tribes of the Wichitas and the
La Harpe.
La Harpe, de la Harpe, Bernard de la Harpe. And he made treaties with them. So those 2 men were the first French explorers that came in to make treaties. And of course after that, the coureurs de bois, the fellows from French Canada, would bring missionaries down to different posts in the farther north, and then they'd sneak away from them and come down this way on their own to trade in furs with the Indians. And there was a law against them. They were to be outlawed entirely if they could catch them. But then after they once got out in the wilds, they were unable to catch them. And so gradually these people came down and infiltrated all the branches of the Mississippi, especially the Arkansas. And so there were there were traders up there on the Arkansas at that time was navigable clear up almost to the Kansas line, or perhaps farther. And there was a great deal told about the country. And Dick Tuesday spoke about it, said the Indians told him that they had a salt mine 2 or 3 days' journey away. Well, that would be the Salt Plains, you see, from where they had the salt mine.
Up in the northern part of the state.
Whenever they'd have guests, they'd feed them. The chief would feed them himself with his own hands and sprinkle the salt on as he fed them. So it was considered to be quite a thing. That talk about practically rich and having that. Of course, there was supposed to be also Dr. Thoburn excavated up there and found out about the location of the villages, and they found a cliff there, where one village below a cliff.
Yes, sir.
And they dug, and they found blacksmith shops had been there, and that was their hide skinning place. And they'd run the buffalo off over the cliff, stampede them off over that cliff, and that saved shooting, you see. So there they just skin them right there and throw the remains out into the river. And they had quite an industry there, it seems, from what he's discovered by digging down into the village site.
When you look into it, some of those Indians were rather ingenious, weren't they?
Yes, they were. And there were tools there that they had made out of the...
When you look into it, some of those Indians were rather ingenious, weren't they?
Yes, they were. And there were tools there that they had made out of the flint rock that they got up, I think, up near Hardy, Oklahoma. There were tools there that were patterned after the French. And the archaeologists have said that they were patterned from the early French, the parts of the muskets and things of that sort. Triggers and parts of the musket were fashioned after the French patterns. And of course there's a lot of French fleur-de-lis, brass and things of that sort dug up there, but of course the French brought in pieces of old French guns, but they've never been able to find a complete gun, just pieces. Probably they were broken up purposely when the French withdrew.
And scattered about. So a great deal of interesting history you found about this area.
Yes, there's no end to the things that could be found if one had the time and the opportunity and the ability, the financial ability to go ahead and do things. There's many, many things that I suspect out at the Historical Society they have many projects that could be carried on. Probably at the University of Oklahoma also. Projects that could be carried on. They're pretty jealous of anybody doing it unless they do it themselves. They don't want just everybody to rush in and do things because most people don't know how to excavate or how to work or how to do, and then a good many of them are in there to get curios and things of that sort to carry off instead of putting in the museums.
Instead of preserving them as they should be.
They have a great deal of the artifacts, nearly a wagon load of them over there that haven't been sorted and arranged yet, besides a lot in the cases that have been arranged from that village site of Ferdinandina. It was called, we found out it was called Ferdinandina. We had no history in those days, but the English and Scottish maps back in the early 1800s carried that location and called it Ferdinandina. And it's right at the mouth of where Deer Creek empties into the Arkansas. There it is. So we went up there and found it. Evidence of the stockade there. And the spring that they talk about is still there, gushing pure water. And you can't mistake the location at all. But there are other villages on the other side of the river that have never been explored. And this one concerning the Buffalo Cliff Village that's Thoburn explored that. It's north and a little, I think, east of the Ferdinandina site. The two of them, I think, are the only ones that have been explored very much.
Are you working on anything at the present time?
No, I don't have any project right now. I've been getting out this poetry magazine, Oklahoma Poetry Magazine, for 4 years. And in between these other things, I've been getting those poems. They send them to me by the dozens from all over everywhere, and especially the school children. We've been trying to develop our young people in their desires to write. And I've published a lot of poems in here that probably are not much poetry, but the children have written them. And it's given them a start, especially the Putnam City school children, 5th and 6th graders.
Really?
And you'd be surprised at some of the things that those youngsters can write. Here's a little one that a 7-year-old boy over Tulsa wrote. He got up in the night and said, "Mother, I want to write a poem for Grandpa." And he got up in the night and wrote this poem. "A crow I know, a crow I know, he is so slow, so slow, so slow he can hardly go. He's so cute, he wears a black suit, black suit, black suit, and he's a beaut. The crow is my friend, he sits on the wind, the wind, the wind that carries my friend." And this is the end. So I had the picture of a crow, and I put that in there with it. Then I made the remark, "I know that crow. In fact, he sent me his picture." So the boy was so elated over that poem, he just took his grandfather's copy away from him, and the grandfather couldn't get it back. Carl was holding on to his cap. And then there's a wonderful poem in here, "Ode to the Buffalo" by Aline Mai. She's one of our grade school teachers here in town. But it's a beautiful thing, several pages long, but it pictures the buffalo rocking, rocking, rocking as they gallop. And the fact that they have left their mark on the land in the buffalo wallows all over the country and things of that sort. It's a very picturesque thing that she's written. When she went into, I have a poetry workshop group that meets third Sunday of every month, and we write poems, and they work like everything, and they've been winning all the prizes now practically for 3 years in the poetry realm. Here they've won 18 prizes last year in the Texas State Poetry Contest, and they won 5 or 6 from the Nebraska State Contest. And they're all the time winning with these poems that they write. And so this buffalo poem was written in the workshop, and many others through here have been written, and I've been trying all the time to encourage people to write and give vent to their ideas and their feelings, regardless of the form that it may take. Poetry nowadays is not held to the dignified forms of long ago, but there's so much of what they call free verse now, and they introduce their thoughts and follow along more with the idea of the thought than although there is a rhythm in it, yet it doesn't rhyme. We've been running this magazine for 4 years. It's practically a free project. We had no funds to start it the first 2 years. Gerald Jacobs and I ran it and did all the printing and everything. And then, of course, we sold subscriptions and sold some magazines. Then I had enough money saved up from that to carry it on 2 more years. So then I decided we'd better quit while we were in the clear.
Well, you haven't wasted a minute, it doesn't seem.
Well, I try to keep busy most of the time. There's lots to do and lots that you can do, and it's interesting, and it's work that you enjoy. It really isn't work. It's sort of a hobby or a pastime more than anything else.
Well, along with your writing, what else have you been engaged in now? After you helped your brother there, for instance, in the law office.
Yes, well, mostly that, and then when I've been out, I've been in the print shop off and on ever since I was 10 years old. He put me in the print shop when I was 10 years old back there in Kansas, and I learned to set type, and when I was 17, the year before I graduated, the summer, another boy and I edited a newspaper all summer long. I was the editor, and he was the business manager of the Quinnamo News. Man owned the paper and didn't know how to run it, so we went over there and ran it during the summer for him. And then I've been in the print shop ever since, off and on. I went through high school and college on the print shop business, and I still work in the print shop.
You still do?
2 a week, yes.
Where?
Over at Mr. Dunn's printing establishment, 22nd and Western. And we set most of these handbills that are circulated in the grocery stores. And I go over and set 1 or 2 of them, usually on Tuesday, and then go back Thursday and Friday and put the type back in the case from what I've said and from what the other folks have said.
Keeps your hand in, doesn't it?
Yes, especially in the print shop. I like that because when I have something to print, for instance, now, my little book, I wrote it and set it up and printed it. That little book on Awatobi with the shell picture on it.
Oh, yes.
I did all of that myself, printed it and everything. And then I have 1 or 2 other little books that I had printed myself over there.
Did you print that Geronimo?
No, I didn't print that. Mr. Dunn printed the Geronimo. See, the Geronimo poem is in my larger book, Tales of the Night Wind. It's part of this book too. I got the Geronimo out first, and then later incorporated in the larger book. So it's in here too, and the all the different poems of different kinds that I've been able to write.
Oh, your poetry has been prolific.
There's a poem in here on A.C. Blue Eagle. A.C., you know, was the great artist over on the east side of the state, and passed away a few years ago. He painted 8 paintings to put in my book in color. But in those days, when this book was gone out, it was so expensive we couldn't afford to do it. So I gave them to the historical building, and they have them now. They're large, a couple of feet long and wide. And
Yes.
long. They're over at the historical building. There's 8 of those paintings, but they were to represent some of my poems here in this book, but we never could use them.
Well, as an early educator and as still an active man, and your feeling and your dedication to education, how do you think we're doing in these days now?
Well, I think we're making progress all along. The young people, as I told my Sunday school class last Sunday, I have the seniors in high school over at the little Methodist church over here in Pennsylvania. As I told them, you people have chances and opportunities that we never heard tell of. When I went to high school, one man taught the whole 4-year high school course. And we sat there in that room and took all those courses under him. He was a learned man. I had 4 years of Latin under him and 2 years of German and physics and all the mathematics, trigonometry and algebra, and history, all the things that were taught in high school. He taught them all. But now they have their separate teachers, all of them trained in that particular skill. They have their libraries. I said, all we had was a big dictionary. It was too big to lift. That was the only book we had in our days in high school. Now they have their libraries with all the facilities, magazines, all the modern discoveries that are being made in this wonderful age. And I do not feel that education is so bad off in Oklahoma. I think they're just getting a chance to assert themselves, these so-called rulers of education. And surely we're not all as dumb as they would indicate, or else we're too dumb to know it, one or the other. And we've been getting along pretty well, even though we are dumb from their standpoint. I think there's lots of advance that could be made. always there's progress ahead of us if we're alive. If we're not, well, we should be buried. But I feel very strongly that there's a whole lot of manipulation in this educational movement, and I'm not in sympathy with a lot of it. I don't know whether education ought to be the handmaid of the legislature. I doubt very much. Hearing a lot of those legislators talk, and the grammar they use, the way they murdered the King's English, I doubt education would be in good hands if they are given too much authority over it. Of course, that's just my own opinion, but sitting on the sideline, I can't help but see.
Well, it's an interesting observation for the simple reason of your background and you might say your dedication to education per se. But usually, in such a field as education, the more progressive and the more educated will out at the end, don't you think?
Oh, yes, I don't think that things are near as bad as some of them like to picture them.
You have quite a library under your name.
Yes, I've written several things. Here's a poem on Kicking Bird. He was one of our Oklahoma Indians, Iowa. He was always advising for peace and to work with the white man. And other members of his tribe were against him. And so they said, we'll put a curse on you and hex you, and so if you don't quit working with the white folks. So here's a little sonnet that has something to do with that. When warriors sat in chains with bold contempt, defying all who dared to counsel peace, old Kicking Bird they scorned, and bade him cease to favor white man's law, or ever tempt the gods that rule, who never will exempt the red man from their will, nor yet release him from the rights, no matter where he flees. They prayed a curse on Kicking Bird's attempt. Before the dawn bring forth fluorescent flame, shall death hold rendezvous with scarlet chief. Then Kicking Bird sat down to dine, and smiled at the threat of prisoners chained, past his belief that they could harm him with their ravings wild. Ere food had touched his lips, the specter came. Some said he was poisoned, but these old fellows said, no, we hexed him. And it was against the law, really, for one to hex one of his own tribe. If you did, you did it at the peril of death. And so we're told by history here that soon after that, the old fellow that put the curse on him died also. So they said, well, that's the way it should be. There are a lot of interesting Oklahoma characters, like Kicking Bird, and different ones that have lived here in Oklahoma, perhaps without anybody knowing too much of them, and yet they have accomplished their work and had their part in what's going on, passed on.
Many of those Indians and those characters, as you say, contributed a great deal, didn't they?
Yes, they did. Now take one of them over there in eastern Oklahoma, who just was run over and killed a while back by a car. But he, on the battlefield in France, he captured a machine gun after machine gun and turned the gun on the enemy and held it all by himself for days until reinforcements could come. And living over there in eastern Oklahoma, just an ordinary Indian, we wouldn't let them make over him or have anything of that sort at all. And then after all of that danger, going through all that battlefield, he was run over by a car and killed just a year or so ago.
Strange, isn't it?
Like the fellow who said he came from New York, I believe, from the busy traffic of the city to a little country town out in Kansas, and was run over by a milk wagon. There's an interesting thing about Geronimo that they claim, some of them say, that his body was stolen after they buried him. They took it away and put it out on the plains so he wouldn't be in a captive grave.
Right.
So I have this little sketch on that, stolen away. They stole him away, so the guardsman said, when questioned by Jews concerning the dead, they stole him away, proud son of the West. No prison grave holds, nor captive shroud folds the clay of a free man at rest. Some of them say, of course, that his body's still down at Fort Sill. It wasn't taken, but some of the Indians said they took it away, and so on.
Uh-huh. Who knows, huh?
Who knows?
He was quite a character, wasn't he?
I think he was. I think he was. I think in the long run, history will place him among the really great of the Indian people.
Mm-hmm.
He was a medicine man from the beginning. As a boy, he was uncannily smart,
Mm-hmm.
and they took him into the Council of the Elders when he was only 12 years old.
Mm.
That's something that probably had never been done before.
Did he later contribute to his own education?
Well, I don't know that he had any education other than just
Self-taught.
a warrior.
Uh-huh.
And but he had scruples of right and wrong, and he insisted all along that he had never lifted his hand first against the white man, but not until they had his brother Mangus Coloradus Red Sleeves was a captive, and had laid some crimes onto him that they had never proved yet. But they had him in a tent with the soldiers, and when he went to sleep, the soldiers said they heated a hot iron and put it to his foot. And when he jumped and leaped against the side of the tent, then they said he was trying to get away, and they shot him. So after that, when Geronimo heard of that, then he went on the warpath against the white people too. But he had a more or less of a code of honor. He had hunted and fished with Lieutenant Gatewood of our army, and so when Geronimo fled to Mexico and they spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars trying to get him, Gatewood said, "I'll go and get him." So they said, "Well, we'll send a regiment with you." "No, I just want the bodyguards. I don't need a crowd. I just want 2 or 3 to go." And so they went to Mexico, and Gatewood sent smoke signals up when they got in the country where Geronimo was, up in the mountain. They sent smoke signals, and he answered back with smoke signals and would welcome them. And they went up there, and they had a feast prepared when Gatewood got there. And then at Gatewood's suggestion, they consulted their medicine men as to whether they should come back or not. And the medicine men finally decided that they should come back. So he surrendered with the thought that he could live still in his Arizona country. But of course, the United States government, when they got him back, sent him down south to prison. And so many of them were dying that they finally brought him back up here. And he was kept in captivity, virtual captivity. He wasn't shut up. He had his own farm and so forth in later years. But he learned to write his name. And he went to the World's Fair at St. Louis and wrote his name at $1 a throw. And I think he was also allowed to be in the inaugural parade for Theodore Roosevelt in Washington. Those were probably the only 2 times that he was away from Fort Sill after he was brought there.
It's extremely interesting, and you brought out many points that I don't think that have been explored.
In fact, every poem in here has a background, some kind like that, a story back of it. And when I was writing this book, Jenny Harris Oliver, one of our great Oklahoma poets, was going to look it over for me and write a foreword, but she passed away before we could get the foreword.
When did this come out?
It's back in 1940, 43, 45,
Mm-hmm.
1945. Mr. Dunn printed this for me. But I know one of the things that Jenny said now, when you write your introduction, it wants to be real short. But I either had to write a long introduction or else put a lot of footnotes.
Mm-hmm.
So I chose the introduction, so I took it over to read to her one day over at Dallas, Oklahoma, where she lived. And I read it to her, and I said, now you won't like this because it's long. But when I got through, she said, if you take a word out of that, you're going to be shocked. So I just left it alone the way it was. And I explained quite a lot of the things in the introduction of the different poems. But of course, you couldn't explain all of them because there are too many of them and too many things about them. So I've got some footnotes yet. I didn't get entirely away from that idea. I think here is a very philosophical poem that the Indians hold called Perfection. The Navajos in making the rugs, you know. And they say, do not say the rug is perfect. That must never, never be. Some slight imperfection woven where the novice may not see still preserves the art of ages, rich in color and design. Navajos tempt not the powers who perfection ne'er assign. Earthly things will cease to function if they ever flawless be. This the end of all endeavor, end of life's activity. In other words, when we get perfect, we got no business here.
We're not mortal.
We ought to go on somewhere else.
That's right.
But that's good philosophy. And the Navajo Indians hold that as part of their ideas. I have in that Destruction of Awatobi several desert poems to make the little book a little bit larger, but they all deal with the Arizona country, the desert country.
Our history around Oklahoma City and its immediate environs is rather sketchy to a degree.
Yes, you see, we were in those unassigned lands, and nobody was here. The eastern people were busy over there. They brought their newspaper and their missionaries with them from the south when they came. They brought their Cherokee newspaper. Sequoia had just fixed up the alphabet, and almost overnight they all learned to read. An unheard of thing before in the history of mankind, where a whole tribe could become educated, be able to read in just a very short time. And they published that paper over there in that language, one column in the language and the other column in English.
Where was that?
It's over in eastern Oklahoma. The files of the paper are out in the historical building. You could go out and see them.
What paper was that?
It was called the, what was that called? It escaped my mind now just what they did call it. But
what tribes?
it was the Cherokee Phoenix when they brought it up here. The Cherokees, but they changed it. They didn't call it the Phoenix after it came here. They called it by another name, and I don't recall it right now. Strange I'd forget that. But that paper was published. They brought their own printing press and all, and they published it in the Cherokee language. One column in the Cherokee language, and the side of it the English. Two-language newspaper. They published for quite a while over there on the east side. And I noticed just lately some college is going to put in their courses that Cherokee alphabet.
Yes.
To teach it to the people. Maybe it's this college here that you're representing this morning. But some college is putting in a course in the Cherokee alphabet. They had they were quite humorous. Sometimes people think that the Indians didn't have much of a vein of humor, but they did. They were quite humorous. I know one little item from, they had a district up there called Going Snake, and the country item sent in by the correspondent from Going Snake said, a United States Marshal visited our community last week, and most of our best citizens hid out.
Most of our best citizens did that. They had to have a sense of humor. It is too bad that someone doesn't compile a good comprehensive history of the city. This would be a great contribution. This And Satan Came also, written by your brother Albert McRill, to compile all the various facets of our city.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, there was no one here at that particular time, and then it just
No.
grew like topsy.
No, you see, we had history west of us. The Comanches were out there roaming the plains, and the Kiowa and the Apaches. And we had east of us, the 5 civilized tribes were all busy, and the northern stretch across there, no man's land, was Cherokee Strip, where the Cherokees was given to the Cherokees so they'd have an outlet to the hunting lands of the west. And there was activity there, and the cattlemen were coming up and rushing in there, and the Chisholm Trail, all those different ones to Abilene. But right here in the center of things, there wasn't anything doing.
Sort of a vacuum.
Yes. Nobody here.
Well, even after the run and the city was established overnight, there are various sketches
Yes, yes, quite
in
a,
it about.
But Dr. A.C. Scott wrote and edited one of the first newspapers here in the city, and he was later, president of the A&M College at Stillwater, and was out here at the university in the English department, one of the most meticulous users, I think, of English that I've ever heard or known anything about. I think he organized the men's dinner club here, too, in the city. But Dr. Scott was flawless in his English. And he wrote some of about the city. He conferred with my brother quite a lot on this book at different times too. But we really didn't have until the actual day of the run. We didn't have much to talk about here.
And since then, it's been a constant source of activity around here.
Oh, yes, we've had all sorts of developments, of course, as naturally one would have. And the growth of the city has been phenomenal. I remember in 1910 when we came down here, 1907, when we came down here in the fall to go to school, whenever we'd hear the fire siren, why, like small town youngsters, we'd try to run to the fire. Well, it wasn't too far to run in those days. Where Classen High School is now and where the old Epworth Church is, which was the university building, was far in the country from town in those days. And the houses that they're demolishing over on 13th Street, where they were the most plush of the plush in fine buildings. And of course they're tearing them down now. And now we look